Annil Chandel, thank you for giving us the time and agreeing to speak to India Global Business. We are very appreciative of this.
You're absolutely welcome, Robin. It's great to be connected up and eventually have the opportunity to speak to you.
Anil, you are the CEO and co-founder of Wurkr. A little bio about you, which I was reading up. You've launched a few companies. You've started multi-million pound businesses for companies. You've lived and worked in 3 continents across the world. And as you told us earlier, you've also done a stint in Dubai. You are currently the co-founder of Wurkr, and you are developing technology products for the future of work, which has become a buzzword nowadays with the pandemic on. So you've been a champion for remote working and distributed team engagement and video technology for office environments. And you are also an ardent advocate of work-life integration. So let me get into my first question, Anil. How is Wurkr different from the other offerings that one is now being exposed to with the pandemic on? Almost everything is changing in the world of tech and in the work environment. So a little insight from you on how Wurkr is different from the other offerings that are available in the marketplace.
Thanks, Robin. It's a very good question, and it's one we get asked quite often. And typically, we get compared with the other offerings in the marketplace. But to be quite blunt about it, what we are trying to do here at Wurkr is take the remote out of remote working is essentially the concept of what we're creating. Because remote working in itself is quite negative in some ways and positive in other ways. I mean, the fact that you can work from anywhere, is a very, very positive thing. But the fact that you're actually remote and you are not connected, with your teams is actually quite a negative connotation when it comes to work, because work is about people. It's about people working with other people, and you obviously working with your clients or your customers and so on and so forth. So one very key part of that is the connected element, making sure you are connected with your colleagues, your workers, your customers, and so on, and more so being connected in a visible way, which is the same way as we are connected here right now. If we were on a telephone and having this conversation, that's almost remote because I cannot see you and I won't be able to connect with you in the same way. So the purpose of Wurkr was to essentially take that connected element that you have in physical offices, physical meetings online. And that was really the key part of what we were putting together. That led to many different facets of things like productivity being increased, reducing isolation, the hybrid element that we're becoming so used to now of having teams dispersed. But essentially Wurkr is a product which wasn't invented for the pandemic. It was before that. We were seeing the workplaces were changing quite drastically. Flexibility was very key for employees, attracting talent, from across the globe, wherever they may be, but bringing them together for an organization in one central place. So Wurkr is creating workspaces where people can feel immersed and connected in a visual, video-enabled sense, rather than just sitting by yourself and working behind a screen without your colleagues.
That's very interesting, Anil. Thanks for that insight. I just wanted to touch upon this, the whole idea of this immersive work experience now that we have all got into, and the work from home culture. There's a lot of time that people spend online, and to use the word like using Zoom or any other technology. It has led to a certain amount of fatigue with the lockdown. It doesn't help. So mental well-being and is a big issue nowadays. You say that with your product, you are confident of ensuring greater well-being, reducing the loneliness, heightening the interactivity, and also boosting the work-life balance. Could you give us a sense of this, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the loneliness element does bring on quite a few things, as you rightly said, relating to mental health, just general well-being, this phrase nowadays of Zoom fatigue that has kicked in. And typically the reason that that's happened is because your traditional video meeting or conferencing products out there are premeditating and then setting up a defined time to then get together. Just that element alone, when something is about to start, creates anxiety. So you instantly start feeling anxious about those instances. So it's not a great way, and it's not typical of just video meetings. It's just typical of doing organized events. So that was the first thing that we were trying to take away, to make it feel like you were transitioning and coming into an office like you would do in a real office. So in Wurkr, you would come into the reception area like you would do in a real office. From the reception area, you would choose to go to a particular office where you may be meeting with your colleagues, or you may be sitting down at your own desk to start your day. However, the great thing was you could actually see all your other colleagues that are also in work at that time. And at the same time, new colleagues coming in, you can see them physically coming in. So the very first challenge that we were sort of inventing to fix online was this element of being able to see your colleagues with their avatars moving around the space. Now that alone, just without the video element and having conversations with your colleagues, enables you to feel like you're part of an environment. Now, where the human and the man and the woman are very much about wanting to be part of, this feeling of connected with people is very, very key. So that was the first thing that we wanted to do. And then what we wanted to create in the space was to allow people to just communicate like they would do in a real office. I could walk over to somebody's desk. They say, hey, how's it going? Good morning. What's going on? Talk about football, talk about, what happened last night on TV, and so on and so forth. So a lot of those water cooler moments, which you cannot do in the traditional video conferencing applications. So that's the second part that we created. So people can just move around the spaces, unless one of the rooms are locked, in which case it's the same as a physical office. If your room is locked, you have to knock on the door to be allowed in. You may be allowed in, you may not be allowed in. So, a lot of our product development has been focused around how do we replicate some of the behaviors that we do in a real office online. If we can do that, we take away a big part of feeling lonely. Because even in a physical office, if you're going to stay locked away in one room, you're going to feel lonely. However, as soon as you step out of your room, you have people around you which you can interact and mingle with. So this Zoom fatigue part comes in partly because, unfortunately, our brains are just programmed in a way where if you're jumping in and out of predetermined meetings that are ticking timelines of I've got to start this at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock and so on, your mind just generally becomes very anxious. So that creates this element of fatigue in yourself. And then we started bringing in things that would just help well-being generally. So a message pops up after being logged in for 10, 15 minutes to just interact with you, say, it's probably a good idea to stand up, or it's a good idea to take a break from the screen for 5 minutes. And then at lunchtime, if you know it's getting to 1 o'clock, a message will pop up and say, why don't you take a walk before you take your lunch break out in your park or something like that. So that starts creating this interaction with the technology, actually providing something to the person using it rather than just your colleagues helping and supporting you as well. So I think those are the elements that we're focusing on. So anything we do and we build at Wurkr, we always think about what did we do in a physical space, or how does it help me, to have a person with me? And you can fast forward this, you can look at intelligent, artificial enabled virtual assistants, which you could have almost a well-being discussion with, something like, I'm not feeling too great about this in what I'm doing right now. And you could have this AI enabled virtual assistant that could, so I'm talking about fast forwarding, 2 or 3 years from now, how it could be enabled. But the key part of it really is about connecting people and ensuring that they can see their colleagues and work in a way and you can interact with them instantaneously.
It's really fascinating. And as you touched upon the fact that you were looking ahead of 2-3 years from now, that was basically going to be the basis of my next question, because in a world which is now so fast paced and tech driven, anything that's yesterday is probably passé, and everyone is looking to, download and carpet bomb the environment with something equally fascinating and new. And in this scenario, obviously the need to keep reinventing is probably in your DNA. So where do you see Wurkr in, let's just say from my point of view, 5 years from now?
So that's a very good question. And, we're quite an agile environment, and we try to stay as reactive as we possibly can. For example, when the pandemic happened, we were in the midst of launching a revenue generating model. But what we decided, myself and my co-founder Tim decided that actually this is an opportunity for us to do something and give something back to society, and genuinely offer this well-being support as a company as well as the product. And we just took the decision to say we are just going to keep the product free for every organization that wants to sign up and use it. And in fact, our peers in similar spaces in the video space did similar things as well. But it was just our way of giving back. Now, nobody could have predicted the pandemic and the results of what we had to do. However, we had to adapt very, very quickly, as did all organizations. So look, one, we're quite agile and adaptive, to what we are doing as the future unfolds. I would say we're on the other hand, we're fairly planned with the technology. So we do have a fairly clear plan on where the technology is going. Something like AI virtual assistants are actually not that far away. They're probably in the next 12, if not 18 months. So that's something we can definitely plug in very, very quickly. Our focus at Wurkr is more about the growth of the business and to take it global. The concept in itself, when you see it and use it, is actually very, very simple. And when you actually use the product, you realize, so it's so simple that why didn't you use something like this previously? And in that aspect, the product itself is quite evolved and it's quite robust. But our focus is growth. We're going through global growth at the moment. We started off in the UK. India is very much on the horizon for us for many, many reasons. The geographical elements, the demographics, the working population, the carbon emission issues that you have. So there's so many elements that we can benefit India with. And then obviously USA is still a big market. So for us, this global growth is definitely one key part of where we see ourselves. But the next 5 years, we're still very much at the early stages of our journey. 5 years are going to go so quickly for us. And I think there's definitely steps in the evolution of technology and the adoption of certain things we would do. But we always keep in focus, how does this benefit the person, the single person that's using it is first. That's where the focus is. The other things, although they are huge drivers like carbon emission savings, the well-being, mental health, getting rid of isolation, they're very big elements. However, we keep it down to the very simple fact, how can we help an individual in this, but with technology. That's the first part of it. And we do not advocate people to only be using technology and staying online. There's nothing like meeting people in person. So our model is very much about how do we also engage with the hybrid element. So can somebody book a space, to go to a physical office within Wurkr? So could you bring up a little pop-up and say, I want to be working in Liverpool Street in central London today. Let me see which office is available. And I'm going to invite my colleague along, and then we can go to this physical space and actually meet in person. So you still have to keep that physical element in place. You cannot send the world just online, behind a closed door, in your room. You have to have a balance between the two.
The World Economic Forum last year, they made a pointed reference, obviously, against the backdrop of the pandemic, and you were there before the pandemic. But suddenly you find yourself becoming part of this pandemic scenario where your usefulness suddenly gets even more highlighted against the work from home culture or the simulated work environment. So they made a reference to workplace flexibility. Obviously, it's become a very critical topic in the future of work and professionals. So you were talking about the economics of it. Do you think that this trend is economically justified, or do you think it's just a evolving workforce that is now craving a modern convenience as opposed to physically going to work? I just wanted your thoughts on this, if you could share.
Yes, it's a very good question, and I think there's a lot of debate, around this. There's many advocates of this way of working, and you'll probably find as many advocates against this way of working. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's an element of modern culture, demanding more flexibility, because the traditional way of working, and I'll say traditional in the sense, we're talking 2 decades, 3 decades back, the traditional way of working, has changed and has had to change for many, many reasons. And one is just the talent element. Can you find all your talent within, let's say, a 20, 30 mile radius of where your headquarters are, when talent is so global these days? And the simple answer is no, you cannot. So now, do you spend huge amounts of money to open an office up every location that you require your talent to be based in? And the answer is, economically, that's not viable. So hence we had the likes of WeWork and Regis's of this world that created these co-working spaces where you could easily replicate. But even those spaces are not cheap. They're still fairly high profile central city locations, probably the most prominent buildings. So the cost of bringing those up, maybe having them empty 50, 60% of the time, is a huge cost, for running those spaces as well. So economically, if you just look at the cost per desk for having a physical office as against having a hybrid solution and maybe having one location with hot desks where people can come in and out and work part of the time in the office and part of the time wherever they choose, you will save money. There's no question about that. And then you look at the other less, commonly measured elements, such as, in the UK, there was a report I was reading, there was 119 billion miles driven for work each year. Now, if you look at that metric just on its own, now, if you could even make a 10% saving on that, what does it do to the cost of the travel, the time potentially wasted of doing that for irrelevant meetings? I'm saying there's always relevant meetings that you need to be somewhere physically, but there's a huge percentage of irrelevant meetings that we attend where we travel distances for many, many reasons. So you can save time, you can save money, and you can actually make a big difference to the carbon emissions outputs that we're doing. So the same report also mentioned something like 54 million tons in greenhouse gases are created by those 119 billion miles that we travel for work. Now, those are the underlying things which I think this planet that we live on, this rock that we're all presiding on, it's not being able to sustain the way we are continuing to see the growth. So something has to give. So if we just look at it purely from an environmental element, and that will have a knock-on effect to the economics of the country and individuals, that alone should be the driver to offer flexibility. And flexibility has been around for a long time, and I think organizations talk a lot about it, but in reality, we don't do enough about it to provide it. What the pandemic has done, it's forced it upon us. That one, you have to stay at home, you have to work in this way, and suddenly people have realized that actually I can still be productive, I can still be engaged, and I can still do the work that I was supposed to do when I had to travel somewhere to do this. PwC did a report, and they said most CEOs said in the pandemic, 78% of workforces went remote. So that's a huge number. But on top of that, they also, I mean, YouGov did another report which said about 57% of people who went working from home are going to now continue working from home. Now, businesses have got no choice but to adapt that, because if they don't adapt and take those sentiments on, they're going to start losing talent, because that talent's only going to look for companies that will give that flexibility. So I think today more than ever, from an environmental, from a modern workplace and the cultural shifts that we're seeing, I think it's needed, having this hybrid element, and flexibility is a very key part of that hybrid element, which in its own brings work-life integration, balance, if you see whichever word you want to use. I prefer integration, because again, there's a lot of studies been done on work-life balance, and people think when you get work-life balance, it's more about your life than it is the work, but it should be the other way around. It's integration. Both of them need to seamlessly work together.
I think what was seen as a disruptive change is now being seen and analyzed as more of a common sense approach now. And as you said, research has been done to show that there's an improvement in profitability, productivity, performance, engagement, employee retention, and so on. But when you let's look at 2021 for Wurkr. Do you think that the environment is big enough for you to coexist with the other platforms, or is Wurkr charting out a path entirely of its own, an organic and a kind of sticking to its own DNA and personality, and you're charting out your own path?
It's definitely, we can coexist. There's absolutely no, I think, challenge in coexisting, and there's elements of what we do which are very similar to some of our better known competitors. And there are elements that our better known competitors are starting to do, which we essentially have been doing for quite some time. So I think first and foremost, look, we can always coexist. It's not me, and I only need to be the only one in this space. But what the pandemic has done, it's put a magnifying glass on the lack of solutions out in the market that absolutely tackle this element of immersiveness to ensure visibility of all your colleagues. So, for example, some of our other applications that we sort of get pigeonholed with as very similar are more about text-based or chat-based collaboration, and then premeditated meetings, when you want to come together. Now, that's not what we do. Our approach is about being connected, throughout your working day, and be able to see your colleagues and work with your colleagues as required. Of course, you can premeditate and book a meeting within our space in a particular room, and you can chat, and you can have text-based collaboration as well. However, our focus is very much about how do we replicate that immersive element of the physical office, which I think our competitors are not focusing as much on. They're almost replacing an element of what you may have. So how do I share this document and collaborate with everybody else? And the answer is those solutions are available. I don't need to reinvent that. I'm more than happy to go and integrate with my co-colleagues who have created products in the marketplace and give our clients that ability to have the best of their world inside our immersive environment. So for us, 2021, with the pandemic coming about, there are definitely more players. There are more. We're not the only one in this space, but I think we all do something slightly different. And we're all, because it's a new space, we're also adapting a lot as well. And as with the big video meeting applications already out there, they all do very similar things. And we know there's probably a dozen or so very big players in that space, and they're all comfortably taking a nice market share of the organizations they're working with. So there's plenty of space for everybody to coexist is our way, and we can always help each other. Microsoft just recently announced a big fund for people to come and start developing things on top of their Teams platforms. I think Zoom did something very similar as well. So everybody realizes there's collaboration needed even within the technology space as well. And it's already happening. And that's very key for us. Yeah, it's very, very key for us to ensure we partner up and we provide integrations.
Annil Chandel, thank you so much for giving us your time. We're really appreciative of that. And we learned a lot from this. And I'm going to look at my workspace with a completely different perspective after this interview.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's very, very good to speak to you. And you know what? Try it out for yourself. I mean, I think you'll be surprised how immersive the space is, and love to get your feedback on it as well, because I'm sure you see many products in the marketplace.